Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Wow, podcast listeners, we really have an amazing episode for you today. My name is Kathy Mazek, and I'm your host for this episode. And I wanted to explore getting public. I wanted to talk about public scholarship, about putting yourself out there, about communicating your scholarship to a wider audience. And so I invited epidemiologist Dr. Becky Dawson to the podcast. You might remember her from the summer of 2020. So much has changed, and she has really leaned in to the public in public health, which is her field. We talk about how COVID-19 firmly shoved Becky into the very public spotlight. She was on TV, and how she has continued to kind of develop that public voice through doing Facebook Lives in a community Facebook group about the pandemic, in creating a blog and publishing a weekly blog post, in continuing her TV appearances, and in working with community members like school superintendents on issues of public health. We're also going to get into the painful side of taking your scholarship public, which is when you are open to criticism and critique. And in the case of epidemiologists nowadays, and many scientists, unfortunately, critique that is often based in anger. And what Becky had to do to develop her mindset around whether she really wanted to keep going with being so public and communicating her science to the world while she was getting very harsh and sometimes scary reactions to her public messages. Now, there are lots of juicy links in this week's show notes, including the link to how you can enroll in Dr. Becky Dawson's free epidemiology intro course that she is creating for the public. So we've linked that up in the show notes. You'll also find a link to how you can subscribe to Becky's newsletter and see her blog so you can be getting her weekly take on the pandemic. And also, I want to announce here for the first time publicly that we are going to be offering a one-day workshop called Public Relations for Professors. So if you are inspired by hearing Becky's talk, we encourage you to follow the link in the show notes so that you can register and be a part of that day-long workshop that's happening on March 25th, 2022. So we'll link up in the show notes to all the information about that. And for now, please enjoy this inspiring interview about public scholarship with epidemiologist Dr. Becky Dawson. All right, yay! I am back for two-time podcast interviewee, Dr. Becky Dawson. I'm so excited that you're here. You may, if you're an avid podcast listener, you may remember Becky's episode from the summer of 2020 when things were very different. And so, I mean, different and not. But we're going to have a conversation today about being out there with your scholarship, about public scholarship, in some ways about public relations. And I thought that Becky was like such a great case study for this and an example of someone who has lived it in the last 2 years. So let's start out with like, could you introduce yourself and then tell us like where you were pre-pandemic? So let us know what you do and who you are, and then what you were thinking about and what in your career kind of pre-pandemic.
So my name is Becky Dawson, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a associate professor and epidemiologist, and I have joint appointments. I'm one of those people that was hired in two departments, so a biology department and then also a global health studies program at Allegheny College, which is a small liberal arts college, high focus on teaching and working with students on their independent researcher. So training them up to be thoughtful, inquisitive, great question asker types of people.
Yeah. And I remember when I met you, when you came into our Elevate program, you were already tenured and I remember you were kind of like dealing with this being in two departments. Some of the things, if I remember correctly, that were a concern for you was like, oh, I want to develop these researchers over here, but also I'm doing all this teaching and also all these things. And then COVID. So how did your career shift at the beginning? And then we'll talk about how you've kind of developed in the last couple of years.
Yeah. So actually, there's this one other piece of it. I actually am a research director at a local hospital. So I actually run research projects, clinical research projects. And that was when I met you, I was trying to decide, how do I balance this? I can't be teaching medical residents and teaching a 3-3 with student research and trying to do my own scholarship and. I was really struggling, but I was getting ready for a sabbatical. I was supposed to be on sabbatical the academic year of 2021. So that's where I was. I was, overwhelmed, knew I was doing too much, really wanted to figure out like what the next couple of years, maybe next decade of my life would look like. And then COVID hit. And for me, when I say COVID hit, I started recognizing a new year. So that would be December 31st, 2019, that something was happening. And then I actually on January 24th, so that would be, way before it started impacting our teaching and everything. I actually got a phone call from the comms people at the college, and they asked if I'd be willing to drive to the local news station, which local for me is a 45-minute drive, and do my first interview. And I was like, what does this mean? And they were like, well, it means going on television and talking about what is kind of transpiring. And in January of 2020, the first case had hit the US, Italy was starting to blow up. And we knew that what had, the focus in Southeast Asia it was a global problem at this point in time. So I said, sure, I would do that. And I talked to the station manager. And then I just remember really quickly, calling my husband and being like, I need the car. I'm going to the TV station, but I'm simultaneously Googling, what do you wear for your first TV interview?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And right. And I do remember the very sweet man in our comms department called me back and he's like, is everything set? And I said, yes. And I'm like, do you have any great words of advice? And he said, yes. He's like, don't talk with your hands like you do in the classroom. And I was like, what? And he's like, I've been in your classroom. I know what happens. And he's like, you get really excited. He's like, take a pen, do something and hold it, so that you're not crazy. So my life really changed in that moment. I thought it was a one-time thing. The next thing I knew, not only was I going back for panel conversations and Facebook Lives, but we were doing call-in centers. So I would sit and staff the phones all afternoon, answering people's questions one-on-one, and then go do the news. And by the time Elevate actually started, I had my own segment on the evening news. So 5 days a week, I was doing evening news. I was the sports block. So I was doing it with the sports broadcaster because by that time, all athletics had been canceled, professional, college, high school. So they needed a filler, and I was the filler. So I was doing a segment on the news every Monday through Friday. I think I did it for 14 weeks.
Wow. So you were shoved into the public spotlight, and it came to you through your university's communications, office or whatever. They were like, yeah, we've got an epidemiologist for you. Here she is.
Exactly. I did that one interview. I could have stopped it at any point. I could have said no. I could have said, this is, I mean, 2020 for me, I was on an overload. I had more seniors than I had had in forever. And then we went remote, and I do have two children that were home. One who was not functional. I mean, he's too little to be, I think he was in first grade, right?
Yeah, no.
I mean, he couldn't even do remote learning. It was really hard. So I think that, for me, I could have said no at any point in time, but there was this, I have a system for making my decisions. And every time I came back to it, I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Everyone is telling me this is going to sound funny because me, they were telling me I was a calming presence, that I was articulate, and I was actually calming viewers down watching the news, which my personality is like cheerleader on speed. I'm like, let's go. But they said that when I was there, I was able to, answer questions and field people's concerns. I was, told that I was empathetic. So every time I turned around, I kept saying yes to the opportunities because I felt like I was coming there as myself. I was providing a service. I was using my expertise in a really good way. And it was valued by people that were, external to me, which was, it was nice, but also really reaffirming that it was the right space to be in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you're in public health. So there's a public that is part of your orientation as a scholar, I think,
Exactly.
right? From the beginning all the way through. So, it got real public real fast, but it makes sense to me that speaking as an epidemiologist in public health, or anybody in public health, being able to communicate science to the public is part of the job in a way. And I bet something that attracted you to the field, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, when I went to get my PhD, I had visions of going back to governmental public health, which is where I had been prior to graduate school. Academia just kind of came to me as a route to do the things that I wanted to do. But I think that, my struggle before COVID was, where do I see myself? I've done this academic thing for a decade. I have tenure. I know I'm at that space where, I'm getting ready for a sabbatical. How do I do this? And then an opportunity came about, and I've been joking, it's really cliche, but putting the public back in public health, or putting the public back in health.
Yeah.
It, has been so, prior to the pandemic, you were told that what you needed to do to be healthy was exercise, eat right, drink enough, sleep enough, don't drink enough alcohol, right? It was all you control all of your health. And I think we have lost track of the fact that, if your neighbor is sick, or the person sitting next to you on the bus has a disease, you might be doing all the things right, but you can get sick too. And so I was wrestling with all of that, even though I couldn't name it all. And then these opportunities came about, and every opportunity came with another opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. So it was right. And I think that for the first time in my career, that was the first time that the opportunities were happening organically, and I didn't feel like I was pushing it. And I think that also was a signal to me that I was stepping into the right space. That step that I was taking was the next right step, which was affirming and really helpful, because it was scary stepping into that space because I didn't know anyone else that was doing it.
Yeah. So everyone who's listening is thinking, how the heck did she manage her classes and her kids at home and her research at the hospital and all of these things, and show up on a TV segment, and do the sports, right? And show up on the TV segment instead of the sports guy every week. So or every day, however often it was. So talk a little bit about how you kind of negotiated with your university and how you yourself kind of navigated that.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the beginning, there wasn't a lot of negotiation. I think that one of the things, smart things that I look back that I did, I got, not to be mean to the communication folks, but things were happening so fast that I built my own relationships, shared my phone number, and did all of my own scheduling for all of my TV appearances. That was really important to me. It got to the point, where I was able to do a lot more from home, which was really helpful, saving me trips. So I prioritized, if they were bringing in the county commissioner and all the people from the hospitals and the health department, then that was worth the 45-minute drive to be part of that. But if I was doing segments on my own, I really tried to Zoom, pre-record, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I took advantage of all the things. I did all asynchronous learning during spring 2020 when we all went remote and made myself available like for office hours.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful. It also allowed me to connect with students. I was lonely just like everyone else. And I missed people who I cared deeply about. And then, I just co-worked with my kids. There are many times where and people can't see this, but I have a long desk in my office and I would just plop a child down in the Zoom picture and just not worry about it, recognizing that proximity was really important. And then we just committed to every day, 3 to 5, we got out of the house during the pandemic. And we explored, I always talk about, I have a cemetery near my house and we explored the cemetery and the ravine and the pond and, all the things regardless of weather, because we all needed to get out of the house. So I valued my relationships with students over class time. I think that was really key. And then just taking out all of the middle people. In terms of figuring out my schedule, I did it on my own so that it was completely on my terms and I could negotiate some of the details that made a huge difference. Not having to drive the 45 minutes. That's an hour and a half of driving. That was key to my sanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as the pandemic kind of went on, we're talking now, we're 2 years in. I noticed from my perspective, you did the Elevate program, we were kind of together and I saw you often for 6 months. And then I noticed that you started an email list. And so you were writing, and I think it's weekly. Mm-hmm. So a weekly email. And I think you also publish those same emails on a blog. So talk about how that kind of public outreach developed over the 2 years. So you had kind of all of this, we're taking over the sports section, you're getting called up for panels and all these things. But now the pandemic goes on and on. So how did you decide to write the blog? How do you find time for that? What was behind some of those choices?
Yeah, so the blog really came out of a local thing. I actually had a county commissioner, so a local governmental official that had started a Facebook page to kind of provide people with information. And I was doing weekly live Q&As. And I think this was my first real step into wow, this is what I'm committing to, because preparing for those Q&As took a lot of research, right? I was trying to stay on top of things because people were asking questions about therapeutics, vaccine development, all that. So I was doing that once a week. It was a huge time suck, but it was also really fun because, at the end of a week, when you look at your Facebook Live and you're like, holy smokes, 4,500 people have watched this hour-long Q&A. I'm making a difference in people's lives, they're coming back. So I was doing that. I was doing it weekly, and it got to the point where news was so coming in so fast, and really it was right as vaccines were rolling out in December of 2020. That I decided I couldn't keep up with the individual emails and direct messages. And I was overwhelmed, but I could look at those messages and usually I could respond in a blog post.
Yeah.
So I could answer the questions live when people were willing to step into that space. But I could also field all of the questions because they were, I started blogging in February of 2021. Mm-hmm. And it was right when all the vaccines went live, when Johnson & Johnson was paused, when, we heard variant for the first time, right, that word. And so I was able to step into that space and start writing there. And it became cathartic. I had a rough fall of 2020. I think I've mentioned this before. Public health was under the gun, and I was no exception to, I wouldn't say death threats, but lots of threats, lots of dismissals of my expertise, of my field. The comments on social media were harsh and really hard, and I needed an outlet. And so my first blog post was kind of me stepping into I need to start getting thoughts and feelings and, everything onto the paper, if not for everyone in the community, but for myself. And then all of a sudden, when you have thousands of people reading your writing every week, you kind of realize that there's value in this, not just for me, but for others. And it was exciting, but also really was motivational. I really, stepped into that. And, there's a lot of epidemiologists who are providing updates and summaries of data. And, I was able to take a different angle because I have a creative side to me. And so bringing in poetry and art and novels and relating history into all of that has just brought me a lot of joy, but also connected me to a lot of different people. I rewrote something that was Shakespeare and I can't remember. Oh, To Be or Not to Be, I rewrote as To Mask or Not to Mask. And how did Shakespeare scholar reach out? And just, how relevant this actually was and how I was able to capture the anxiousness of masking, relying on Shakespeare, right? It was Shakespeare's words, me just kind of like doing that. And so it just became a thing, and it is truly my favorite thing, but it did mean throwing other projects away. It's a commitment. Writing, publishing every week is a lot of work. Yeah. So I had to slow things down and recognize what I value and what I don't value and make a list. This is my priority, and I can't do these other things if I'm going to keep these as my priority.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to put a pin in the backlash part and get back to it and dig into this idea of like your written words in your blog and your Facebook Lives are probably reaching more people than any academic paper you've ever written.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that many people feel a pull to do more kind of public types of writing or to communicate their scholarship more into a mainstream audience. But the academy doesn't, quote unquote, count that, right? Like, it doesn't matter that you're like, reaching more people, having more impact. If you're going up for promotion, it's not in a journal with impact factor. And so it doesn't count. So of course you are tenured. So like in some sense, like you're not in that anxiousness of early career where you really have to like follow your university's rules for the first few years so that you can get that promotion. But can you talk a little bit about how you see this kind of public writing and public speaking really, right? Like kind of count towards your academic work and how you negotiated that either with your university or just inside yourself? Because like you said, you had to sacrifice some things. I'm guessing that you weren't like pumping out journal articles at the same time. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Right. So no, I can't tell you the last time I've seen my name in print. Like I've really no memory of it. Mm-hmm. I haven't truly negotiated this with my university. So that is still TBD, but I really have narrowed in and I've really focused my own mission statements. My mission statement's really clear. It's just, I want to create healthy communities. I want health to permeate through all policies, programs, educational structures. I want it available to all. And so in order to do that, I mean, I think that the public health system, the clinical and medical system has, there's so many things. And I just end up falling in this space where I'm calling it my superpower now, is reaching people and helping them to understand. And me creating new research, like doing new work, is just not my superpower. I can do it. I'm trained to do it. I know how to do it, but it's not where I light up as a human being, nor is it where my impact is. And so, I mean, I've asked you this question many times, like, how do I do this? How do I show that I have value? I'm looking at different things. A lot of the times, we share with, well, this is peer reviewed. This is these sorts of things. Well, I now have a different set of reviewers. And I've really thought about this. I have elected public officials. I have CEOs of hospitals. I have a news station that does critique me, everything from the flyaways on my hair. Yeah, I mean, seriously, but also, have told me like, that was really good. That analogy worked. That didn't hit well. It didn't land well with the community, which is really good. And I have a group of superintendents. So I've been working really, really hard with healthy schools, and not just COVID healthy schools, but like mental health, food security, to be very honest, like gun violence in schools. Those are the type of things, fights, right? Drugs. So I work with superintendents. And so I've just been thinking like, my impact isn't a reviewer who's another epidemiologist who's sitting elsewhere, but it's somewhere else. And so it's been hard conversations, but I've asked people for, hey, I need in writing how I've impacted you.
Ooh.
Normally I would have like a weekly research meeting, but instead my weekly meeting on Friday is with like a huge group of superintendents who are local to help them think through whatever the topic of health is of the day. And it's been having to say, like, at some point, I'm going to need you to put in writing what they're in essence research meetings, but how do we apply what we know in order to maintain a healthy environment in the school? But also, I keep saying to my superintendents, and I say mine because they're like dear friends now, how do we get you to the point where you're going back to your job, which is to provide structure for education and assessment of education and hiring teachers and all of that? How do we get you back to that point where that's your focus and COVID's not your focus? So I've just had to flip my switch, and you really helped me think through like what data do I need to get? And I track number of unique opens on blogs. I track number of people who are on Facebook Live. I track how many people are in the service area for the TV stations. And I'm now like employed by a TV station. So I, look at that as like, that's just like a faculty member who goes and is a research consultant somewhere else or partners with somebody else. It's just different. And so I'm trying to make a case. And I very honestly, like, am so fully committed that like, I'm not willing to do peer-reviewed publications because I want to take a stand that this is valued. It's important. And for some of us in the academy, this is our superpower, is to be this front-facing. It's not even get my research out there publicly, but get the research out there publicly, make a difference in people's lives, make what has been, walled off in the academy available to the public. Yeah. And so I'm really working on like, what metrics do I have? What resources, who are my allies? Who are my research partners, or I guess it's my scholarship partners, and how can I bring them into what is typically like a review process?
Yeah, I love that because it's a reframe, right? It's a reframe about what scholarship is and how you kind of quote unquote make something count. I love that you're like reaching out to people and saying like, I need this in writing. I can look at these numbers. So like journal impact factor isn't the only number, that we could look at to think about actual impact. And I think this is obviously across different areas of the different fields. And there's a lot of this kind of, I think there's an increasingly loud shouting about this, about like, we need to do more outreach. This needs to count in different ways. And I just want to mention, because I, very intimately am familiar with agricultural extension, because my husband is 60% agricultural extension in his job. And like, we can't say that this doesn't exist like as a model, because extension's a model, and not necessarily like we want to replicate agricultural extension for all fields. But if you want to look at something that their mission is to take what the research happens in the research center and translate it to people growing the food, and managing the animals and all of those things, like that's what extension is. And so there's models out there, there's ways to do it. So looking, as you're listening, and if you're thinking about like, wow, this is, if you're having any of the thoughts that are like, well, Becky is tenured, so she can do X, or, any of those things, like just take a second and think like there are models, and Becky's providing a model, you're providing a model, but also there's other models out there that we can look to. And it really is like, I hope that listeners, you are hearing how deeply rooted or deeply connected this is to academic mission. And I would say legacy, because in Elevate, we talk about legacy, but it's like, what is that real like lasting impact that you're going to have? And, you're able to like write down some numbers about that. We like to say like, here's some numbers of people that have heard me say stuff, and that's another way to measure. Yeah.
So you had mentioned the agriculture extension. So I had looked at, what do they do? Yeah. And there's one near me. I live in rural Pennsylvania. And so one of the things that they do though, is that they provide educational opportunities for people outside academia, right? Yep. So not for students who are at the schools, but they educate farmers and growers and everything. And I'm like, right, community members. And I'm like, Oh my gosh. And so I actually am in the process. I have module 1 up, but I actually created a community epidemiology course.
Nice.
Epidemiology has been everywhere. And so why not take it out and make it free for everyone, right? Why don't you spend your time, all it takes is a Teachable account for a student. Come and let me teach you about epi. Let's go over the vocabulary and the calculations and what are these things called, study designs. And we're all afraid of statistics. Give me an hour and I can get you to read a paper. And so I've really thought about, being, especially at a small liberal arts college where we're so focused on teaching and expertise. Why not take that out and make your expertise, whether it's, marketed towards senior citizens or marketed towards, whoever, bring your excellence as a teacher to other people. And I think that that's been fun. I've done kind of a soft launch because I'm only through module 1 of a 6-module course, making it available. But when hundreds of people from around the world, I have people in Australia who want to take this community epidemiology class. Like for me, that is so much more important than peer-reviewed publication. And it really is just taking my expertise that I was hired for. I was hired as an epidemiologist to teach epidemiology. Like, how can I get that out to more people and make this field more accessible, make it feel like the public health community is welcoming the public into the work of public health, building trust, sharing knowledge. I mean, to me, that's just inspiring. And I think that there's a lot of, if we really look at models, like you're, writing a blog or having a podcast or something public facing that you do weekly is really important. And it really can help you build that. But then also having something that, you can continue to bring people back to, but also share your expertise with them is rewarding. But I think it's also just another way to frame your scholarship. My scholarship is public education at this point in time. We can't get everyone in our doors at our college, but we could think about like educating them through all these amazing online platforms and tools that we have now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Can we link up to that in our show notes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yay. Yeah, we can all take the course. Yay.
Everyone can take Intro to Epidemiology.
Awesome.
But I mean, that's the other thing, like thinking, I mean, it's a lot of work because what I realized was I was calling it Epi 101. And I actually had a neighbor, sweet neighbor, who's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, Epi, what's Epi? And I'm like, epidemiology, short, like it's a long word. And she's like, I didn't know that. I'm like, okay. And she's like, what's 101? And I'm like, the intro course. And she was like, and so like, it just, the reframing and the learning that I've had to do to recognize that this isn't Epi 101, which is what I would call it with my students on campus. And they all know what we're talking about. Yeah. But this is an introduction to epidemiology, and like having to do that type of work has been really important and really meaningful and made me a better communicator and also allowed me to reach a different group of people that have been excluded from the field that I work in that actually has the word public in the title. So that's been, again, really rewarding.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right. I do want to circle back to the danger that I think many academics feel, and it's not just in their heads, about if I get more public, if I say more things about my field of study, about what I believe about, unfortunately, about science. Okay. I am then exposing myself to public backlash in a way that publishing in a journal or speaking at a conference, you might get intellectually questioned, but you are not probably going to get like threats or you might get undermining at a conference, but not in this kind of way that exposing yourself to kind of public critique is like another level of critique. And really, like, I think many, especially women in academia, like struggle with that, being critiqued and dealing with criticism. And wow, you've had to deal with it now for years and in a very public way. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you're managing?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to do this without getting super emotional. So I think that that's where we start, is that this is real and the threats were serious. They were personal. They extended to my family. So I was saying before we got started here, my daughter, who is in 8th grade now, so would have been an early middle schooler at the start of the pandemic, faced a lot of it, because I was known, and she, people knew her as my child and everything. So a couple of things that I would say is that the threats were real, and it was very, very hard. I mean, I had a really serious place of depression, I think, as all of public health did in 2020, when we were being told that we were ruining the economy, ruining people's lifestyles, ruining, threatening this. We weren't thinking about the big picture. And the big picture being, normal life in the middle of the spread of a virus that we have no treatment or prevention for.
Yeah.
So, as I'm thinking about all the emotion that's welling up right now, the threats were real. The dismissal of my expertise, the dismissal of me as a human being, the number of times I was called Miss or Mrs. when, it was very clear that I have a doctorate and I should be called doctor, was hard. And so I went pretty dark for a while. I will be very honest. It was a real period of depression and anxiety and uncertainty as to what I should do moving forward.
Yeah.
I think there were two things. There was definitely a mindset shift that helped. And I want to really shout out my husband, David, here, who really stepped in during some of the really, really bad times and pointed out that given everything that's happened basically since 2016,
yeah,
if you speak out and somebody comes back immediately with you're wrong, something, he's like, you actually are doing the right thing. He's like, you have to get through that mindset. Now, he's like, that doesn't change the fact that you're scared to go out in public, or that you're worried, or that you don't want to hit send on the publish on the next blog. But you have to understand that when you're doing the right thing, when you're stepping into the space and you're saying, here is proof, here is truth, here is what is unspoken that needs to be said. Here are the voices or the experiences that need to be elevated. When you step in and you say those things and you upset people and they respond, viciously, you're actually doing something right. And so that had to be a mindset thing for me. It truly had to be a mindset. Okay. And then, we talked as a family, but I also talked with people that at my university and people in the community that I trusted, talked with the news station. I mean, they deal with this all the time. Viewers don't like something they cover and they get threats and they work through this. So I asked questions about what to do when a line has been crossed, what is truly unsafe was really important. And I think then having also a conversation as a family about what we do in public. I had it was spring of 2020, and I was out with my kids. We were at this wildlife trail, and we were hiking and looking for snakes, and somebody recognized me from the news. And it was the first time that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in public on a trail. Maybe I have self-service. I'm with both of my young children. Now, these people were very excited to see me, right? And this was a very, cool experience for them, and they wanted a picture with me. But on the flip side of it, it easily could have been the other person. And so coming up with plans as family, what do we do? What is our family plan? How do we communicate with each other that the kids should run, that we should get away? We've had to have those conversations, and that's scary and hard. And I think, I've had to check myself a lot of the times along the way. Is this what we want to be doing? Is this safe? Is this, but it's the same questions that you would ask yourself in other situations. Do I want to continue down this path? Is it good for my mental health? Is it a safe environment to work in? And if it's not, do I step out, or do I put something else in there? Do I create another barrier, another wall, another layer of protection that is important? And so those are the types of things that, we've had to deal with, which is a stress and a stressor that I never expected. But on the flip side of it, we have plans. We've talked about it. I've made friends, I guess is the right word, with people who have also dealt with this, asked a lot of questions. And I think there is this community that's rising both in academia, but also maybe, I don't know where else, but in public health, it definitely is coming about. And so it's real. I think that that's the biggest thing. And honestly, it can't be shied away from. So I think that, no matter what your field is, if you if you step out publicly, especially if you're stepping out, not just like people who summarizing research and stepping out publicly is very different than stepping out. And I mean, I was stepping out and saying, vaccines are imperative. This is why you need to get vaccinated. I've stepped out until like maybe 3 weeks ago and was like, we should all still be masking inside, stop this crazy. But I've learned that, a lot of the times you can teach people a lot by diffusing a situation as well, but being very aware and recognizing that it's going to impact you and also your family. And there's like logistics that need to be worked out and like worst case scenario conversations that actually have to happen. But there's a whole lot of mindset. And I would say the one positive that has come out of all this is like, I am off of social media. Like I do not look at comments, questions, all that. It's not important because that doesn't define me. And like getting that mindset like over, because I would watch like before and like, read like, was my performance well? What did people say? And I'm like, no, this isn't about me anymore. This is about people's anger. And this is about people wanting 2019 back in terms of the pandemic. So that's been a huge positive.
Yeah.
Huge positive, right? Like getting off of social media, I'm way more like, I use social media to get my stuff out, not to get feedback back on what I'm doing. And that has been huge.
Yeah. I know it's hard to talk about. So I really appreciate you sharing that because I know that it's something that underlies a lot of people's fears around being more public with their work. So again, just really appreciate that. So to kind of wrap up, I would love to hear, what are your plans for the future? Like, how do you see the next year to 5 years kind of playing out for your career? Like, do you want to keep being with your peer review of public and local officials and all of these kind of people around you and working with your superintendents and everything? Like, what do you see for the next year and beyond?
So I'm on sabbatical this year, so I haven't been teaching. So it's really allowed me a lot of time to reflect, honestly, get my health back in check, and also to do that deep, like inward look. And so I would say that the process for me has been getting myself healthy. And when I say healthy, I mean physically, but also emotionally, mentally, socially healthy again. Obviously, this work has taken a huge toll. It took a huge toll, and building out practices over my sabbatical to help me be healthy in the midst of all that has been really good. Yeah. So my commitment moving forward is I'm actually, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I need a dichotomy, I guess that's what it is that I'm not done with my scholarship. Yeah. And when I say my scholarship, I mean the research that I used to do, the work that I used to create, right? Like I used to create research and like try to generate opportunities and all of that. And for me, that was the work of generation. There was so much that like I was spending all of my time there and getting very little product. Mm-hmm. And not that I was unproductive as as a researcher, epidemiologist, but like the generation was so much harder for me. Yeah. And I feel like that was where I should have recognized it as this is not your strength, look elsewhere. But it took a pandemic for me to recognize that like my strength, my zone of genius, my space of joy is in the public. It is taking my scholarship and being a public scholar. So I'm committed to that like 100%. Like I've listened to other podcasts about dropping projects. I've dropped a lot. I've really stepped back. And the hardest part has been dropping projects that have involved students, for publications for them. But I've recognized that you have a lot of power as a professor. So, a sweet student whose project I just couldn't do any more analysis and like get it publication ready. And she was applying to a PhD program. I just wrote that honestly in her letter of recommendation. Yeah. She did all the work to have a peer reviewed publication. I'm stalled as a professor. Our field is stalled. Publication cycles are slowed because of the pandemic. This is a paper unfortunately, was about like women's sexual health and like cancer screenings, which needs to be out in the world. But I just couldn't. Yeah. And so I shared in the letter of recommendation the work that she had done, the results that she had found, where potentially if I were at capacity, it could have been published. And she's making her decision, right? I mean, she got into all the schools. Mm-hmm. And so recognizing that there are, yes, having it on your CV is important, but there's other ways to acknowledge the work that we do and the work that our students do. So I've kind of like been able to clear the decks in that space
Mm-hmm.
and really then have committed to, TV, blog, creating a community epidemiology class. And then honestly, new work has blossomed out of that. And I'm not working for the work anymore. And so just following that path has been, where I'm going to stay for the foreseeable future. And everything from writing open access textbooks so that, students get the textbook for free, but also it can be made available to a community member who, wants to do this. That's where I'm going to stay. So I am like firmly like in that space of like, I have nothing related to peer review, journal articles, nothing related to even conference presentations, nothing. But on the flip side of it, like I was invited to be an invited speaker at a conference, right? Yeah. So I did zero work. And now like that's available to me because I've been out there so publicly. And so honestly, that has been how I've been. So I'm firmly there. And I don't know how to say it. Like, I feel like I'm bringing my truest, wholest, most authentic self to this space. And it has never felt better. And like, I'm more excited to be in the classroom with students being that person than being your cookie cutter academic, because I just feel like I'm authentic and, I can share my process with like, well, why do you need to do an oral presentation in a statistics class? And it might be because you have 2 minutes on the local news without knowing the question to explain what efficacy of a clinical trial is. Yeah. Or, why do you need to do this in an intro bio class? Because the first question I was asked on TV was, what's a virus? and you're telling this, like everyone who's watching is my, 6th grade daughter to actually one of my students' grandparents always watches me on TV. So like, I'm like watching her. So I love this space. It hasn't come without challenges. It hasn't come without, a lot of soul searching, but I feel like I'm my truest, most authentic self. And I get to share that authentic self, whether it's the epidemiology side or the side that's talking about leadership or my decision-making or just my journey to get here, that side of it. And it's brought me so much joy. And I feel just really honored to be able to, one, get to that place in life where I can say, this is truly, honestly, who I am authentically, and being able to share that with, thousands of people on a weekly basis.
Well, I am just, I think, not the only one who feels so happy for you and inspired by you standing in those decisions and really kind of doing that reflective work to ask yourself, well, what do I really want? I'm going to create that for myself. So super inspiring. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it was amazing. It's always good to talk to you, but also get the chance to reflect on, what's happened over these past years. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yay. And we'll make sure that we link up your epidemiology course and how to get that weekly newsletter and your blog and everything so that everybody can enjoy those as well.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.